What if the biggest royal mystery of the century wasn't who said what behind palace walls, who made who cry, or who leaked which story, but something far deeper, far more private, and infinitely more explosive? What if the truth everyone has been dancing around for years was never about etiquette, scandal, or titles, but about the one thing Meghan Markle swore the world would never discover: the fact that she could not get pregnant? Imagine hearing that sentence and feeling the floor shift beneath you. Imagine wondering why so many timelines never added up, why so many photos looked strangely inconsistent, why certain people from her past suddenly vanished, and why her ex-husband, Trevor Engelson, walked around with a haunted look every time Meghan's pregnancies were mentioned. What if, right now, you're only seconds away from learning the one secret Meghan allegedly tried to bury so deeply that it cost her relationships, her peace, and her public image? And more importantly, what if Trevor Engelson holds the one piece of evidence that blows the entire narrative apart? Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. You see, some stories come not from hatred, gossip, or imagination, but from the loose threads someone forgot to cut. And the Meghan Markle motherhood timeline? It's held together with threads so loose you can feel them slipping the moment you tug. You might think you know this story. You might think you've heard every angle, every theory, every social media whisper. But everything changes the moment you ask one simple question. Why did Meghan's behavior around pregnancy seem more like a performance than an experience? Why did the timelines contradict each other? Why did her closest Hollywood connections suddenly distance themselves the moment Archie and Lillibet entered the picture? And above all, why does Trevor Engelson, the man she left behind long before royalty was ever on the table, suddenly find himself at the center of the biggest royal controversy ever imagined? Before we dive into the labyrinth of sealed files, whispered testimonies, medical notes, and emotional breakdowns, you have to understand why this moment matters. Why now? Why is this story rising to the surface after years of silence? The reason is simple: something resurfaced, something that was supposed to stay hidden, something that links directly back to Meghan's earliest years in Hollywood, when ambition was the air she breathed and reinvention was her weapon. And hidden inside that reinvention was a medical decision she allegedly made long before royalty, long before motherhood, long before the world knew her name. A decision that would make traditional pregnancy impossible. And yet, she announced Archie. The world celebrated. The press exploded. The palace issued statements glowing with joy and optimism. Photographers positioned themselves for the perfect shot. And then, nothing made sense. The timelines wobbled. The photos fluctuated. The hospital details were inexplicably vague. Medical professionals whispered confusion about protocols that didn't align with any known procedure. And the more you examine it, the more it begins to feel like a scripted performance rather than a spontaneous celebration. But here's the question that keeps people up at night. If Meghan truly couldn't get pregnant, then how did Archie and Lillibet appear? Where did they come from? Who was involved? And what did Trevor Engelson, a man who lived through Meghan's pre-royal life, know that the rest of the world never did? Let's rewind the clock. Trevor and Meghan shared years together, navigating Hollywood's challenges hand in hand before fame reshaped everything. Their relationship, intense and volatile at times, was built on ambition, hope, and an unspoken fear that Meghan's dream of building the perfect image, a successful career, a polished reputation, a beautiful family, might crumble if anyone discovered the truth about her medical past. Friends from that era described subtle moments of tension, unexplained disappearances, and emotional reactions triggered by seemingly harmless topics. Why would a woman so composed, so media-trained, so image-aware, react with panic anytime someone mentioned pregnancy or future family plans? Picture Trevor, frustrated, confused, trying to understand shifting moods and unexplained decisions. Picture Meghan, terrified of losing control of a narrative she hadn't yet created. Imagine the emotional weight of a shared secret that neither of them fully confronted. And imagine the devastation in Trevor's eyes when he realized some truths were never meant to be shared equally in their marriage. The whispers say the tipping point wasn't the divorce. It wasn't the career separation. It wasn't the distance or the lifestyle differences. The tipping point was a medical choice Meghan allegedly made before her relationship with Trevor reached its breaking point. A choice she believed he would never uncover. But he did, and that discovery shaped everything that followed. Fast forward to the royal years. Meghan, now reinvented, now beloved, now scrutinized by millions, understood one thing better than anyone. Image is currency. And motherhood, especially royal motherhood, was the highest form of public validation she could achieve. But how do you present a pregnancy when you cannot physically carry one? How do you navigate global attention, tradition, and palace expectations when you know the truth beneath the surface doesn't match the narrative being portrayed? And the more important question, how do you make sure the people who know the truth, like Trevor, never feel compelled to speak? That's where this story takes a darker turn. Because while the world was celebrating baby announcements and eagerly awaiting first photos, there were people behind the scenes tracking inconsistencies. There were Hollywood insiders whispering that Meghan's timeline didn't match her medical past. There were former assistants and acquaintances who remembered conversations Meghan likely thought they'd forgotten. There were emotional breakdowns during auditions, sudden disappearances from social circles, and a particular medical appointment that raised eyebrows among those close enough to see what was happening. And that's where Trevor's involvement becomes critical. Not because he wanted revenge, not because he wanted attention, but because he had documents tied to Meghan's early Hollywood years, long before royalty, long before media power, long before global reach. Documents that contradicted everything the world believed. Ask yourself, why would a man stay silent for so long? Why carry the weight of information so volatile it could shake an entire narrative? Why protect someone who left him behind and rewrote the story of her life without him in it? Because Trevor isn't just holding on to memories. He's holding on to evidence. Evidence that raises questions about Archie's birth. Evidence that raises even more questions about Lillibet's origin. Evidence that suggests the entire motherhood story might be carefully constructed rather than authentically lived. And as these whispers turned into rumors, and rumors turned into resurfaced files, and resurfaced files turned into a quiet storm gathering behind the scenes, people began to connect dots in ways they never had before. The inconsistencies were no longer isolated. The photos no longer matched. The timelines no longer aligned. And at the center of everything, the one person who could confirm or deny the truth was Trevor Engelson. But this isn't just his story. And it's not just Meghan's. It's a story about secrecy, ambition, fear, and the lengths someone may go to protect a narrative they built from scratch. It's about the cost of image, the price of reinvention, and the hidden battles that shape the public personas we idolize. And as you follow the twists and turns of this dramatic journey, one question will haunt you from beginning to end. If the foundation of a story is fabricated, what happens when the entire structure begins to collapse? We are about to unravel the single most tightly guarded aspect of Meghan's past. We're about to examine the timeline she hoped no one would question. We're about to enter the emotional world she fought desperately to shield. And by the time we're done, you will see why Trevor's silence wasn't loyalty, it was fear. But here's the part that will make your heart race. Trevor wasn't the only one who knew. Because someone else, someone much closer to Meghan, kept a copy of a document she never expected to resurface. A document that ties everything together. A document that explains the inconsistencies. A document that answers the question no one dared to ask publicly. And that document is where our story truly begins. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. What exactly was in that resurfaced document? What kind of record could survive across years, relationships, reinventions, and international boundaries just to fall back into the hands of the one man Meghan hoped would never speak again? The truth is this. The document didn't simply contradict Meghan's public timeline, it shattered it. And before we explore what Trevor found, you need to understand something even more unsettling. Secrets don't survive accidentally. They survive because someone desperately wants them buried. So ask yourself this. How far would someone go to erase the one piece of their past that could unravel their entire future? Imagine the moment Trevor slit open that nondescript envelope, expecting junk mail, bills, or perhaps an old contact trying to reconnect. Instead, he found a folder. A thin, clinical folder marked with codes, dates, and the unmistakable stamps of a medical facility he recognized instantly. He had been there, not as a patient, not as a visitor, but as the person who waited in the lobby while a woman he loved underwent a procedure she swore was routine. But routine procedures don't require specialist consultations. Routine procedures don't demand consent forms that look like binding contracts. Routine procedures don't leave behind scars, physical or emotional, that someone tries desperately to hide. And yet, that day, she told him not to worry. She said it was nothing. She said she just needed a moment. But why did she go alone? Why did she avoid eye contact for days afterward? Why did she flinch when he asked if she was okay? And why, years later, did that very clinic send him a document sealed behind confidentiality labels he thought no longer applied? As he read through the pages, a strange mixture of memory and dread surged through him. There it was, the date, the signature, the name, the procedure, and the cold, clinical note written by a doctor who had no idea the woman he treated would one day become a duchess. A hysterectomy, total and irreversible, no ambiguity, no possibility of reversal, and absolutely no way, no physical way, for her to carry a child afterward. If that were the whole story, perhaps Trevor could have convinced himself it wasn't his place to expose. But it wasn't the whole story. It was only the beginning. Because attached to the document was something he never expected to see, an unsigned memo written by an administrative assistant noting a call Meghan made after the procedure. A call in which she insisted the records be sealed. A call in which she expressed panic that someone, anyone, might gain access to them. A call in which she specifically mentioned that she needed her medical file wiped in case a future opportunity requires privacy. Privacy. What did privacy mean in that context? Was she anticipating a future role? A public image? A reinvention so large that medical truth could become a liability? If so, how early did she plan this transformation? Was this before the Trevor divorce? After? During? And if the assistant kept a copy of this memo, then who else had one? How many versions existed, hidden in dusty boxes or forgotten filing cabinets? The more Trevor read, the more past memories reassembled themselves into sharper, harsher clarity. He remembered the excuses, the vanishing acts, the sudden emotional withdrawals after auditions where casting directors mentioned maternal roles, the strange way she avoided discussing children unless she was forced to, the abrupt turns in conversations anytime family planning came up, and the uncanny ability she had to redirect blame, shift the narrative, and make any concern sound like an accusation. And here's the part that stings most. Trevor didn't discover the truth because he was snooping. He discovered it because someone mailed it to him, someone who believed he needed to know something Meghan had worked tirelessly to erase. But who? And why now? And what pushed them to reveal a secret that had stayed hidden for nearly a decade? Before we get to that, let's go back to one specific period, the months leading up to Meghan's divorce from Trevor. Friends described an increasing sense of distance from her, a wall building between them brick by emotional brick. And the foundation of that wall, fear. Not fear of Trevor, fear of exposure, fear of vulnerability. Fear that the one person who knew her before the persona might one day reveal the truth about her medical past. In those last months, every conversation became a minefield. Trevor would bring up family planning, not aggressively, not obsessively, but simply as a natural topic couples discuss, and Meghan would shut down instantly. She would grow defensive, irritated. She would redirect the conversation toward her career, her independence, her goals, and her frustration with Hollywood. She would say things like, "I don't want to be defined by motherhood," or "We don't need to follow society's expectations." But it wasn't philosophy. It was fear dressed as conviction. And Trevor sensed something deeper. Have you ever spoken to someone who was answering questions you didn't ask? Have you ever felt like the truth was hiding behind every sentence, every pause, every forced smile? Trevor felt that every day, and the more he tried to understand, the more Meghan shut him out. At one point, a close mutual friend asked Meghan directly why she was so tense around Trevor, and her response? "He wants things I cannot give." Those words stayed with Trevor long after the divorce. He assumed she meant time, attention, or emotional availability. But now, with the document in his hands, he couldn't help but wonder if she meant something else entirely. Here's where the contradictions start to snowball. If Meghan truly could not get pregnant, then her sudden shift into royal motherhood becomes even more curious. Why would someone unable to conceive try to present the perfect pregnancy? Why insist on privacy around medical details? Why choose photo calls that avoided traditional hospital settings? Why were there no hospital staff present in the official announcements? Why were certain protocols waived? Why did even palace insiders admit privately that they were confused by the secrecy? Ask yourself honestly, how many coincidences can stack up before coincidence becomes strategy? Let's examine the timeline through the lens of the document in Trevor's hand. The hysterectomy date predates Meghan meeting Prince Harry. It predates the royal engagement. It predates the fame explosion. So from the moment Meghan entered the royal sphere, she already knew she could not conceive. Which raises a question that echoes like thunder. How early did she begin planning a pregnancy narrative? And who helped her? And why did she fight so fiercely to control every detail of Archie's birth? Because if you look at the timeline of her relationship with Harry, the pacing is interesting. A whirlwind romance, lightning-fast engagement, rapid ascension into royal status, and almost immediately after, whispers of a pregnancy. Was it magic timing, fate, or meticulous planning? And what about Trevor? How did he respond to seeing Meghan present herself as a mother years after she convinced him motherhood wasn't part of her life plan? Friends say he was stunned, not jealous, not angry, confused, deeply confused, because the Meghan he knew had been clear, painfully clear, that pregnancy wasn't possible. And yet, there she was, cradling a bump in photographs that never looked the same twice. That's when the folder in the envelope became more than a record. It became a roadmap. A roadmap to questions Trevor never thought he'd have to ask. And yet, as he pieced the details together, the whispers from Meghan's past grew louder. The contradictions clearer. The inconsistencies sharper. Why did Meghan panic whenever old friends asked about her medical history? Why did she distance herself from people who knew her before the reinvention? Why were certain ex-colleagues allegedly asked to sign NDAs after she joined the royal family? Why were some of Trevor's mutual friends cut off entirely? And why, after years of silence, did someone decide now was the moment to send Trevor the one document Meghan never wanted him to see? Some claim it was sent by a former assistant. Others believe it came from a medical worker who recognized Meghan from her royal appearances. A few insist it was someone inside Meghan's old social circle who had grown tired of her rewriting the past. But the truth? No one knows. Not yet. All we know is this. When secrets resurface, they rarely return alone. They come with shadows, with echoes, with reminders that nothing stays buried forever. And that brings us back to the document itself. The last page, barely attached, slightly crumpled, containing a short handwritten note by someone unidentified. A note that read, "He deserves to know." Who wrote it? Why did they think Trevor deserved to know? And what did they expect him to do with this information? Trevor didn't tell anyone immediately. He didn't call friends. He didn't go to the press. He sat with it, quietly, alone. And the more he thought about it, the more the truth haunted him. Because the document didn't only expose Meghan's medical history, it exposed the foundation of the motherhood narrative she built years later. And if the foundation was fabricated, then every layer above it was at risk of collapse. Now here's where the story twists again. Because just as Trevor began to process everything, he received something even stranger. Another envelope. Unmarked, unstamped, hand-delivered. And inside it was something even more explosive. But what came next would not only change Trevor's understanding of Meghan, it would threaten to rewrite the entire narrative she had built. What exactly was in that second envelope, and why did it arrive without a stamp, without a sender, without even the faintest clue of who delivered it? Before Trevor even opened it, he felt that same sinking sensation you get when you know a truth is about to reveal itself whether you're ready or not. Have you ever felt that? That moment where your heartbeat becomes louder than the room, where your fingers tremble before they touch the paper, where your mind races ahead to possibilities you can't quite name, but somehow already fear. Because that's the state Trevor found himself in as he slid a thumb beneath the seal of that mysterious envelope and found a photograph. A single, grainy, time-stamped photograph that pulled him straight back into the final months of his marriage to Meghan Markle. A period he had tried desperately to forget. But why that moment? Why that month? Why that exact day? And why would anyone have a picture of Meghan entering a medical building at 8:47 a.m. on a Wednesday she swore she spent in back-to-back editions? Let's pull the curtain back on that time, because this was the moment Hollywood began whispering long before the world ever caught on. In the months leading up to the divorce, Meghan's behavior shifted in ways Trevor couldn't articulate at the time. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't explosive. It was subtle, like someone switching gears without warning, someone who suddenly realized the life she was living no longer aligned with the life she wanted. One day she was affectionate and engaged. The next she was distant, irritated, unreachable. One day she'd talk about starting fresh together. The next she'd announce she needed to focus on her career or figure out her next steps. Every couple experiences tension, but this wasn't tension. This was rehearsal, preparation. The kind you do when you're planning an exit long before the other person realizes the door is even open. Hollywood insiders began noticing something off too. Casting directors whispered that Meghan seemed distracted. Coworkers complained she was on edge. Friends confided privately that she seemed overwhelmed by something she refused to name. And the more people observed her, the more they began to notice a pattern. Every emotional spike, every unexplained mood shift, every sudden disappearance coincided with one recurring theme: medical appointments that Meghan insisted were routine, last minute, or nothing to worry about. But if they were nothing to worry about, why lie about where she was? Why hide appointment cards? Why tell Trevor she was meeting a friend when the friend later called, confused, saying they hadn't spoken in weeks? Why tell her agent she was at a read-through when the production assistant claimed she never showed? Why did everything revolve around secrecy? One night, long before the divorce papers, a producer Meghan admired invited her and Trevor to a small industry dinner. It should have been a moment of joy, a step forward, a chance for Meghan to shine. Instead, when someone casually asked if she ever wanted children, Meghan froze. Not a small freeze, not a thoughtful pause, a complete shutdown, as though the question had struck a nerve so raw it sent her entire body into defensive mode. Trevor tried to lighten the moment, cracking a soft joke, but Meghan's reaction was sharp, tense, almost panicked. Later that night, when he asked her gently why the question upset her, she snapped that he should know better than to bring that up in public. But he hadn't brought it up. Someone else had. So who was she really angry at? Moments like that weren't isolated. They piled up quietly. A stack of inconsistencies, evasions, reactions that didn't match the situation. And if Trevor had known then what he knew now, that Meghan's past held a medical truth she was terrified of confronting, maybe he could have understood her panic better. Maybe he would have seen the signs. But hindsight is cruel like that. It doesn't show you the truth until it's too late to do anything about it. The divorce didn't come out of nowhere. It grew from whispers. Whispers Meghan heard from casting agents who didn't see her as leading lady material. Whispers she overheard about Hollywood's preference for actresses who could project maternal appeal. Whispers from friends who were settling down, having babies, starting families. Choices Meghan had already lost the ability to make long before Trevor ever entered her life. And the weight of that truth, combined with her skyrocketing ambition, created a pressure he could never have seen coming. But the whispers weren't just emotional. They were literal. People talked. Assistants talked. Medical office staff talked. Hollywood is a city fueled by rumors disguised as facts and facts disguised as rumors, and Meghan's repeated visits to specialists didn't go unnoticed. She always arrived alone. She always kept her head down. She always insisted on confidentiality. And yet someone at the clinic, someone who remembered her face, someone who recognized her from later headlines, connected the dots. That photograph in the second envelope was proof. Not proof of wrongdoing. Proof of fear. Proof of secrets. Proof that Meghan was trying desperately to outrun a truth she could never fully escape. Look closer at the context surrounding that photograph. On that very day, Trevor remembered Meghan coming home pale, exhausted, distant. She brushed him off when he asked if she was okay. She said she'd had a stressful audition. But Trevor suddenly remembered something he hadn't thought of in years. She wasn't carrying a script. She wasn't wearing makeup. And her clothes looked suspiciously like the type you'd wear to a medical appointment. Comfortable, loose, practical. Have you ever remembered something years later that suddenly makes all the scattered pieces of a story click into place? That's what this moment was for Trevor. One photograph was all it took to make him realize he had never truly understood the ending of his marriage, and that perhaps Meghan ended it not because of incompatibility, but because the life she wanted required distancing herself from the one person who knew the truth. Meanwhile, Hollywood insiders who interacted with Meghan in that period described a version of her very different from the polished figure she presented years later. This Meghan was restless, on edge, struggling, juggling the desire for fame with the growing realization that her career wasn't taking off the way she had hoped. She had a recurring role, yes, but she wanted more. Bigger roles, bigger stages, bigger opportunities. And motherhood, real motherhood, wasn't just impossible. It was a liability, something she believed could hinder her career progression, something she believed casting directors would discriminate against, something she believed limited her options. And yet, she couldn't talk about it, couldn't admit it, couldn't even hint at it. And that silence, that secrecy, that pressure, it created cracks that widened with each passing day. During the final months with Trevor, friends recall an increasingly anxious Meghan. She changed her phone password twice in 1 week. She deleted entire message threads. She whispered on calls. She left rooms abruptly when Trevor walked in. She snapped at questions that weren't even directed at her. It wasn't guilt. It wasn't betrayal. It was preemptive damage control. Because Meghan was preparing for something. Something bigger. Something she needed a clean slate for. But the question is, preparing for what? It's easy to say now that she was preparing for reinvention. That she saw Trevor as part of her old life, and Harry as a path to something grander. But that explanation is too simple, too neat, too free of the emotional complexity that defined that period. The truth, the fictional truth we are exploring, runs deeper. Because Meghan wasn't simply walking away from a marriage. She was walking away from a version of herself she no longer wanted. A version burdened by medical history. A version overshadowed by limitations. A version she feared would never allow her to become who she wanted to be. That's why the photograph matters. Not for what it shows, but for what it represents. A moment where Meghan confronted her reality and realized she could not outrun it without leaving Trevor behind. But the whispers didn't stop when Meghan did. Hollywood keeps receipts, even when you don't want it to. Assistants talk. Agents talk. Drivers talk. And somewhere in that swirl of chatter, someone made a copy of that moment. A still frame from a security camera or a telephoto lens, and kept it. For years. Hidden. Forgotten. Until suddenly, just like the medical document that arrived before it, it surfaced again. The photo didn't come with an explanation. It didn't need one. The timestamp spoke for itself. The building spoke for itself. The tension in Meghan's face spoke for itself. And for Trevor, it cracked open a part of the story he didn't know existed. The part where Meghan wasn't simply distancing herself from the marriage, but from a truth too painful and too risky to carry into her next chapter. Because here's the twist, that day wasn't random. That appointment wasn't routine. It was pivotal. It was the moment Meghan learned something definitive, something irreversible, something that made motherhood, at least in the traditional sense, impossible. And that revelation didn't break her. It shaped her. It fueled her ambition. It pushed her toward reinvention at any cost. But if that was the day Meghan learned her truth, then the real question becomes, who else knew? And more importantly, who else was willing to expose it years later? Because the contents of that second envelope weren't limited to a single photograph. There was something else tucked behind it. Something crumpled. Something small. Something handwritten. A note. Just 2 words. You forgot. Forgot what? Forgot who? Forgot that secrets have a way of returning when you least expect them? Whatever it was, the note was only the beginning. Because what came next wouldn't just open old wounds. It would expose the one person Meghan never expected to turn against her. And that person was about to speak. But what they revealed would shake Trevor to his core. And no one, absolutely no one, saw it coming. Have you ever held something so delicate, so explosive, that you almost didn't want to read it? That's the pressure Trevor felt as he unfolded the small, creased note hidden behind the photograph. 2 words. You forgot. But as he stared at the shaky handwriting, something inside him shifted. A memory he had buried under years of hurt, confusion, and unanswered questions. A memory that didn't make sense back then, but made perfect sense now. Because "you forgot" wasn't an accusation. It was a reminder, a pointer, a nudge towards something he never realized mattered. So he went searching. He dug through old boxes, binders, drawers, places he hadn't touched since long before Meghan reinvented herself as royalty. And then, after nearly an hour of tearing apart his storage closet, he found it. A slim, tin folder with Meghan's old initials scribbled on the corner. Something he hadn't opened since their divorce. Something he had forgotten existed. Inside it, he found the letter. A letter Meghan never meant for him to read. A letter she wrote during the darkest moment of her life. A letter that revealed everything. And as he unfolded the single page, his breath caught. His hands shook. Because this wasn't just a letter. It was a confession. A window into a moment of fear and vulnerability Meghan had tried desperately to erase. It began with a line he never could have anticipated. "I don't know who I am without control." That one sentence hit him harder than anything he had learned so far. Because suddenly, it reframed everything. The secrecy, the evasiveness, the strange mood swings, the emotional distance. It wasn't anger. It wasn't manipulation. It was fear. A fear so consuming that she put it into writing only once and never meant anyone to see it. But the letter didn't stop there. It spiraled deeper. "I know I can't give you what you want. Not now. Not ever. And the hardest part is pretending it's a choice." Trevor read that line again and again, because in their marriage, whenever the topic of children came up, Meghan always framed it as a lifestyle decision, a preference, a career priority. But here, in her own handwriting, she admitted it wasn't a choice at all. She already knew. She knew what the medical procedure meant. She knew the permanence of it. She knew that no matter how much she loved him, no matter how much she wanted to build a future, she could never give him the family he hoped for. And she hated herself for it. Have you ever loved someone and realized they were hurting in a way you never noticed? Have you ever looked back and seen clues you missed because you trusted their words more than your instincts? That was Trevor's reality as he continued reading. "I don't know how to tell you without losing you. But I'm already losing myself pretending nothing happened. I'm terrified you'll look at me differently. I'm terrified you'll stay out of pity. I'm terrified you'll leave. I'm terrified of everything." The contradiction was painful. She feared he'd leave, but she also feared he wouldn't. She feared vulnerability, but she feared secrecy too. She feared exposure, but she feared silence. Every emotion was tangled, messy, contradictory, human. This wasn't the voice of a manipulator. This was the voice of a woman drowning in a truth she couldn't handle. And yet, she never gave him the chance to understand. Never shared the weight she carried. Never allowed him to be part of the battle she fought alone. But why? Why not tell him? Why hide something that painful from the one person who had vowed to stay with her? The answer came in the next paragraph, and it was the line that shattered Trevor's heart more than anything else he would learn later in this story. "I can never be what you expect, and one day, you'll resent me for it." She wasn't wrong. If Trevor had known at the time, would it have changed their marriage? Or would it have accelerated the end? That's the question that haunts anyone who reads words written from fear. But the letter went even deeper, darker, more revealing. Because tucked halfway down the page was the admission that redefined everything the world would one day believe about Meghan Markle. "I'm afraid of being forgotten. Being ordinary. Being replaceable. I need more. I need to become someone else. Someone else. Not a better version of herself. Not a healed version. Someone else." The reinvention wasn't an accident. It wasn't a reaction to divorce. It wasn't a royal fairy tale. It was a necessity born of panic. A desperate attempt to outrun her past, outrun her limitations, outrun the truth she believed made her unlovable. The letter continued with a confession that made Trevor stop reading entirely for several seconds. "I don't know how to live with the fact that I can't have a child. I don't know who I am if I can't have the life other people get so easily. I don't know how to face you. I don't know how to face myself." There it was. The truth she had spent years keeping hidden. The truth she would spend even more years constructing elaborate narratives to cover. The truth that would shape every decision she made after leaving Trevor's life behind. She didn't just fear being childless. She feared being lesser. And in a world where image was everything, where careers, relationships, and opportunities depended on perception, Meghan couldn't accept that reality. The letter ended with a line so revealing, so raw, that Trevor felt his chest tighten. I don't know how long I can keep pretending. One day, this secret will ruin everything. And then there was a final scribble. Not part of the letter, not part of the emotional outpour. Almost an afterthought. Burn this. She didn't want this version of herself to survive. She didn't want any evidence of vulnerability. She wanted reinvention, complete, polished, untraceable. But here's the twist that makes this entire chapter breathe with a strange kind of irony. Trevor never saw this letter back then. It never reached him. It never made it into his hands. Which means someone intercepted it. Someone kept it. Someone waited. And now, years later, they sent him the photograph with the note, "You forgot." Not because he had forgotten the moment, but because he had forgotten the letter. The letter someone else saved from the fire it was meant to die in. But who? Think about it. Who had access to Meghan's private life back then? Who had access to her emotional breakdowns? Who had access to her writing desk? Who had access to her unsent letters? One name fits. Someone close. Someone trusted. Someone who vanished from Meghan's life before she became famous. Someone who resurfaced only when the past began cracking open. Someone who knew the truth and believed Trevor had the right to know too. But here's where the story twists harder. Because as Trevor absorbed the weight of the letter, he turned the page over and found something written on the back. A second message. Short. Terrifying. You were never supposed to see this. But you need to. Because she isn't done rewriting the story. Rewriting. Not healing. Not explaining. Rewriting. This wasn't the end of the truth. It was only the beginning. And just as Trevor began to process it, his phone buzzed. An unknown number. One he hadn't seen since before the divorce. A voice from the past. Shaking. Breathless. Saying 6 words that sent ice through Trevor's veins. We need to talk. It's about her. But what that voice revealed next would crack the narrative open wider than anything Trevor had discovered so far. And it would lead him to something he never expected to find. Proof that the hysterectomy wasn't her only secret. What if the truth you thought you'd finally uncovered was only half the story? What if the revelation that Meghan had undergone an irreversible procedure wasn't the final twist, but merely the doorway to an even darker, more tightly concealed secret? That's exactly what Trevor faced as he heard that trembling voice on the phone. A voice he hadn't heard in years, a voice he never thought he'd hear again. And the moment he answered, everything he believed he understood about Meghan's past began to unravel in ways he never imagined. The voice belonged to someone who had once been impossibly close to Meghan. Someone who had disappeared long before the royal narrative ever took shape. Someone who had been there during the Hollywood years, the auditions, the anxieties, the days of uncertainty, and had witnessed the emotional storm that followed her life-changing medical procedure. The voice on the line? An old friend of Meghan. One who vanished abruptly. One who always kept to the background. One who never wanted to be part of the fame, the reinvention, the spotlight. Her former roommate. And the moment she began to speak, Trevor realized he wasn't talking to a bitter ex-friend. He was talking to someone who had been carrying a secret as heavy as the letter he had just read. Trevor, she lied to you. She lied to all of us. And it wasn't just the hysterectomy. The line crackled with a kind of tension that comes from someone who has been silent for too long. Someone who has seen things they can't unsee. Someone who knows the truth but has never known what to do with it. Trevor froze. Because if the hysterectomy wasn't the whole story, then what else was hiding in Meghan's past? The roommate didn't wait for him to speak. I was with her the night she made the decision. I was the one who drove her. I was the one who stayed in the waiting room. And I was the one who saw the doctor afterward. She inhaled sharply, as though saying the words out loud brought back memories she had worked years to bury. She didn't tell you the whole truth. And she didn't tell anyone else either. That procedure, it wasn't optional. It wasn't scheduled. It wasn't something she calmly decided. It was an emergency. An emergency. 2 words that changed the tone of the entire revelation. Because emergencies aren't planned. Emergencies aren't neat. Emergencies come with fear, panic, trauma, and consequences that ripple outward for years. An emergency caused by what? Trevor finally asked, though part of him wasn't sure he wanted the answer. There was a long pause. A silence so heavy it felt like the world held its breath. When she told people it was a fibroid issue, that was the lie. The real reason, the real thing that forced the procedure. Another pause. She delayed getting treated. For months. Because she didn't want anything getting in the way of her career. And there it was. The contradiction that defined Meghan's entire early Hollywood life. The fierce ambition. The relentless reinvention. The refusal to let anything, even her own health, derail the identity she was building. But the roommate wasn't finished. She knew something was wrong long before she went to the hospital. She ignored the symptoms. She kept working through pain, through severe episodes that would send anyone else straight to the ER. But she wouldn't go. She kept saying she had auditions, meetings, opportunities she couldn't miss. The image was heartbreaking and maddening at the same time. A young woman so determined to succeed that she played Russian roulette with her own body. It got worse. Way worse. She started fainting. She couldn't keep food down. She woke up in pain so intense she couldn't walk. But she kept telling me that if she missed even 1 week of auditions, she could lose her momentum. Then came the night everything changed. The roommate described it like it happened yesterday. I found her collapsed in the hallway. She was shaking, cold, barely conscious. I called an ambulance. She begged me not to. She kept saying I can't go, not today, but she couldn't even stand. Trevor felt his stomach tighten. He never knew any of this. He had never even suspected it. They rushed her in. She wasn't stable. The doctor said the damage had spread. That waiting had made everything worse. That waiting had made treatment impossible without surgery. And that if she didn't do the procedure immediately, she might not survive. Trevor sat down. Hard. Because now it wasn't just about a procedure. It was about life or death. It was about a young woman terrified of losing everything. Her dreams, her identity, her future. But who ended up losing something even more profound. That night, the roommate continued. They told her she wouldn't be able to carry a child. Ever. And she sobbed. Not because of the medical news. Not because of the pain. But because she believed it would make her uncastable. Unwanted. Invisible. There it was. The heart of the fear Meghan spent her entire life outrunning. She didn't tell you because she didn't want you to see her as broken. She didn't tell her friends because she didn't want pity. And she didn't tell the world because she wanted total control over who she became. But here was the twist, the piece no one had connected. That night, the roommate whispered. She wrote the letter. The letter Trevor had just read. She left it on her desk. I think she meant to give it to you. But the moment she was discharged, she changed. She shut down. She didn't want to talk about it. She became determined, obsessed with making sure no one ever found out. Trevor closed his eyes. He could picture it. Meghan, in a hospital gown, staring at her future collapsing around her, deciding then and there that she would reinvent herself so completely that the truth would become irrelevant or invisible. She made me swear never to tell anyone. Then she burned almost everything connected to that night. But I kept one thing. And that's when she explained the second envelope. The photograph. The note. And now she revealed something even more shocking. That second envelope wasn't the only thing I kept. I have the rest. Everything Meghan tried to destroy. The memos. The appointment cards. The discharge papers. The doctor's notes. I kept copies. Trevor's pulse pounded in his ears. Why? Why would she keep the records Meghan begged her to burn? The roommate's voice trembled as she answered. Because I knew one day she would rewrite the story so completely that even she would forget the truth. And someone needed to remember. And then, almost as an afterthought, she dropped the final bombshell. And Trevor, the hysterectomy wasn't the only thing she tried to erase. There was another procedure. One she hid even more carefully. One that wasn't in the document you found. One she made sure the palace never learned about. Trevor felt a chill crawl up his spine. What procedure? He whispered. The roommate inhaled sharply. The one she had after the hysterectomy. The one that made pregnancy not just impossible, but physically impossible to fake without help. Help. The word hung in the air like a storm cloud. What kind of help? Trevor asked, though he already feared the answer. Another long, suffocating silence. Surrogacy assistance. The consultation. The financial arrangement. The confidentiality paperwork. The clinic logs. She started it years before she met Harry. The world seemed to tilt. Because if Meghan had begun surrogacy planning long before royal life, then the narrative wasn't spontaneous. It wasn't natural. It wasn't even unexpected. It was planned. designed, constructed. And as Trevor tried to process this new truth, the roommate delivered the cliffhanger that sent his mind spiraling into 1,000 questions. I didn't call you to tell you this. I called because someone else found out too. Trevor's heart dropped. Who? He asked. Her voice shook. They reached out to me last week. A man. Someone who worked at the clinic. Someone who recognized Meghan when she became famous. And he said he still has the original file. Trevor felt the breath leave his lungs. The original file. The complete one. The one Meghan thought was destroyed. The one that could expose everything. Not just to Trevor, not just to the roommate, but to anyone. And that man. He wanted to talk. But what he planned to reveal next would unravel Meghan's reinvention more completely than anything discovered so far. And it would leave Trevor with a choice he never wanted to face. A choice that would change the story forever. What if the truth behind a public image wasn't just hidden, but architected? What if the carefully curated narrative of motherhood wasn't the result of fate or timing, but of a plan set into motion long before the world ever saw a royal romance unfolding? That's exactly where Trevor found himself as the roommate's final revelation echoed through the silence of his kitchen. The idea that Meghan had met with a surrogacy clinic years before she met Harry wasn't just surprising. It was sinister in its implications. It meant she was preparing a story she hadn't yet cast a leading man for. Preparing a future that didn't yet exist. Preparing a narrative that she would later present to the world as spontaneous, natural, and blessed. But why prepare so early? Why make arrangements in the shadows? Why construct a plan that depended so heavily on secrecy? Trevor couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't simply a medical choice. It wasn't simply a response to the hysterectomy. It wasn't even just emotional fallout. It felt intentional, strategic, like a chess move made long before the opponent sits down at the table. And the roommate didn't disagree. She started looking into surrogacy options right after the surgery. The roommate said, her voice steady now, as though she had rehearsed every word in the mirror for years. At first, I thought she was just trying to prepare herself for the future. She was devastated, Trevor, and desperate for control again. But then she took it further. She wanted anonymity. She wanted discretion. She wanted something no one would ever trace back to her. Trevor's jaw tightened. Because that didn't sound like someone simply grieving a lost future. That sounded like someone rewriting one. What exactly did she do? He asked. She contacted agencies. Multiple. In different states. Using different email addresses. She set up consultations under variations of her name. And she didn't just ask about surrogacy. She asked about future-proofing the process. About privacy clauses. About non-disclosure agreements. About what could happen if she became more public. More public. The phrase stuck in Trevor's throat like a splinter. Because Meghan wasn't public then. She was still a background actress in Hollywood. Still fighting for roles. Still grinding through auditions. Still struggling to get noticed. So why was she asking about surrogacy privacy as though she expected to become someone recognizable? This wasn't normal planning. This was foresight. Foresight so precise that it bordered on prophetic. Trevor closed his eyes, trying to imagine the version of Meghan he once loved. The version who curled up on the couch after long days. The version who kept journals filled with dream roles and career aspirations. The version whose ambition he admired more than anything else. Had she really been thinking this far ahead? Had she truly been mapping out a future that didn't exist yet? And if so, why him? Why marry him if he wasn't part of the long game? The roommate continued as though reading his thoughts. She wasn't planning a family with you. She was planning a life for herself. You were part of it for a while. But the more she built that plan in her mind, the more she realized her partner would have to fit the story she wanted to create. She wanted upward mobility. She wanted influence. She wanted a narrative arc that couldn't include a husband who knew the truth before she could rewrite it. What do you see when you look at a photograph? A moment? A memory? A truth frozen in time? Or do you see something else? Something staged, something carefully arranged, something designed not to reveal reality but to disguise it? That was the question burning in Trevor's mind as he prepared to meet the anonymous clinic worker, the man who claimed to hold the last surviving copy of Meghan's surrogacy file. And yet, before Trevor could even set foot near the meeting place, the universe decided to throw another curveball, one that arrived in the most unexpected form. a folder of photographs that had been quietly sitting in a forgotten email inbox for years. It happened the night before the meeting. Trevor was at his desk, scrolling through old contacts and messages, trying to piece together the timeline of Meghan's early Hollywood years. Something told him to check an old email account he hadn't opened in ages, a backup account he used only during the first seasons of his producing career. The moment he logged in, he saw it. A single unread message from an unnamed address, sent years earlier, with a subject line that chilled him. "You'll need these someday." The email had no text, no signature, just a single zip file containing 37 photographs, 36 still frames, each one more unsettling than the last. And as Trevor opened the folder, the truth hit him like a punch to the chest. These weren't moments he'd forgotten. These were moments he had never seen. The first photograph stopped him cold. Meghan walking out of a small clinic in Los Angeles, wearing an oversized hoodie and sunglasses, holding a folder against her chest as though shielding it from the world. The timestamp? 3 months before she and Trevor first discussed marriage. The location? One of the clinics the roommate had mentioned, a clinic specializing in surrogacy coordination. The second photograph? Meghan entering the same clinic 5 weeks later. Different day, different outfit. Same look of tension, of secrecy, of urgency. The third? A shot taken through the window of a coffee shop, where Meghan sat across from a woman Trevor did not recognize, a woman who, according to the roommate's earlier revelation, matched the description of the private surrogate broker. But it wasn't just those photos. It was the pattern, the frequency, the timeline. Because the 4th, 5th, 6th, and 7th photographs showed the same pattern repeating month after month. Meghan arriving alone, leaving alone, always tense, always careful. And each time, the timestamps aligned eerily with moments in Trevor's memory, days when she claimed to be at auditions, networking events, or rehearsals. Days when she seemed irritable, distracted, emotional, distant. Days he now realized she had spent constructing a secret future. But the most disturbing photo of all, the one that made Trevor's skin crawl, was the 8th image in the folder. A seemingly harmless still frame, taken at a different clinic 2 years later. A more polished Meghan this time, wearing a crisp blazer, makeup done, hair perfect, sitting in a small office waiting area, flipping through a magazine. But the detail that broke Trevor's breath? The magazine wasn't a casting booklet. It wasn't a Hollywood trade paper. It was a surrogacy pamphlet, a glossy, neatly folded guide titled, "Your Path to Parenthood." And she wasn't alone in that one. Sitting beside her, half obscured by the angle, was a man. A man Trevor recognized. A man he never expected to see connected to this story. A former producer. Someone who had worked on one of Meghan's earliest projects. Someone who had mysteriously stopped speaking to her. Someone who had disappeared from her circle the year before she met Harry. Suddenly, the roommate's final line echoed in Trevor's mind. She didn't do this alone. Someone helped her hide it. And now, finally, he knew who. But the photographs didn't stop there. The 9th image showed Meghan inside the clinic, speaking with a nurse at the reception desk. The body language was unmistakable, guarded, anxious, insistent. She was gesturing toward a stack of paperwork, leaning forward, emphasizing something. The nurse, meanwhile, looked confused, almost hesitant. The 10th, a shot of Meghan standing beside a filing cabinet in the hallway, looking over her shoulder as though she'd heard someone approaching. The lighting was dim. The camera angle was distant. But there was no mistaking it. She was removing something from the cabinet. "What were you doing, Meghan?" Trevor whispered to himself as he zoomed in. "What did you take?" And then came the photo that changed everything, the 11th image. The one that made Trevor understand why the clinic worker had reached out. The photo that made the hair rise on the back of his neck. It was a close-up of a document. Not a clear one. Just a corner. Just a fragment. But enough to read a few words. Patient request for confidentiality extension. M. Markle. A confidentiality extension? Why would she need that? Why would she request it repeatedly? Why did she look so desperate in each photo? The 12th through 26th photographs were variations of the same theme. Meghan outside clinics. Meghan speaking with the broker. Meghan handing over envelopes. Meghan meeting with people whose faces were blurred or partially visible. Every photo painted a picture Trevor had never seen. a version of Meghan whose life pulsed with secrecy long before royalty ever entered the frame. But it was the last 11 photographs that tied everything together, not by what they showed, but by what they revealed between the lines. The 27th showed the broker handing Meghan a sealed packet. The 28th showed Meghan signing something with trembling hands. The 29th captured Meghan crying, not dramatically, not theatrically, but in quiet, exhausted despair, outside her car. The 30th? She wasn't alone. Standing beside her was the same producer from before, his hand gently on her shoulder, as though comforting someone who had just been told something life-changing. The 31st? Meghan placing the sealed packet into a small fire pit behind her apartment building. The 32nd? The packet half-burned. The 33rd? Meghan staring into the flames. But the final 4 images were the ones that drove the truth home like a knife. The 34th showed Meghan entering a clinic one last time, looking determined, composed, resolved. The 35th showed her exiting with a different file than the one she burned, a cleaner, thinner one. The 36th showed her standing in front of her car, making a phone call. Her expression was not sad, not panicked, not anxious. It was focused, calculated, prepared. The 37th and final image hit Trevor with a force he wasn't ready for. A close-up of a file tab with the words, "Client profile, future public figure, special privacy required." Future public figure, not current. Future, meaning the clinic had been prepared for the possibility of her rising to fame. Meaning she had instructed them accordingly. Meaning Meghan's narrative had never been spontaneous. It had been anticipated, shielded, protected by layers of secrecy long before the cameras ever turned toward her. Trevor leaned back in his chair, the weight of the truth crushing him from all sides. Because these photos weren't just proof of surrogacy planning. They were proof of intent, proof of anticipation, proof of a story crafted with precision years before it reached the public eye. And as he sat there, stunned, his phone buzzed with a new message. A number he didn't recognize. One sentence. "You've seen the pictures. Now you need the file." Trevor's pulse quickened. The clinic worker. The man the roommate warned him about. The man who held the last piece of the truth. A second message followed. A location. A time. What exactly was in that second envelope, and why did it arrive without a stamp, without a sender, without even the faintest clue of who delivered it? Before Trevor even opened it, he felt that same sinking sensation you get when you know a truth is about to reveal itself whether you're ready or not. Have you ever felt that? That moment where your heartbeat becomes louder than the room, where your fingers tremble before they touch the paper, where your mind races ahead to possibilities you can't quite name, but somehow already fear. Because that's the state Trevor found himself in as he slid a thumb beneath the seal of that mysterious envelope and found a photograph. A single, grainy, time-stamped photograph that pulled him straight back into the final months of his marriage to Meghan Markle. A period he had tried desperately to forget. But why that moment? Why that month? Why that exact day? And why would anyone have a picture of Meghan entering a medical building at 8:47 a.m. on a Wednesday she swore she spent in back-to-back editions? Let's pull the curtain back on that time, because this was the moment Hollywood began whispering long before the world ever caught on. In the months leading up to the divorce, Meghan's behavior shifted in ways Trevor couldn't articulate at the time. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't explosive. It was subtle, like someone switching gears without warning, someone who suddenly realized the life she was living no longer aligned with the life she wanted. One day she was affectionate and engaged. The next she was distant, irritated, unreachable. One day she'd talk about starting fresh together. The next she'd announce she needed to focus on her career or figure out her next steps. Every couple experiences tension. But this wasn't tension. This was rehearsal, preparation. The kind you do when you're planning an exit long before the other person realizes the door is even open. Hollywood insiders began noticing something off too. Casting directors whispered that Meghan seemed distracted. Coworkers complained she was on edge. Friends confided privately that she seemed overwhelmed by something she refused to name. And the more people observed her, the more they began to notice a pattern. Every emotional spike, every unexplained mood shift, every sudden disappearance coincided with one recurring theme: medical appointments that Meghan insisted were routine, last minute. or nothing to worry about. But if they were nothing to worry about, why lie about where she was? Why hide appointment cards? Why tell Trevor she was meeting a friend when the friend later called, confused, saying they hadn't spoken in weeks? Why tell her agent she was at a read-through when the production assistant claimed she never showed? Why did everything revolve around secrecy? One night, long before the divorce papers, a producer Meghan admired invited her and Trevor to a small industry dinner. It should have been a moment of joy, a step forward, a chance for Meghan to shine. Instead, when someone casually asked if she ever wanted children, Meghan froze. Not a small freeze, not a thoughtful pause, a complete shutdown, as though the question had struck a nerve so raw it sent her entire body into defensive mode. Trevor tried to lighten the moment, cracking a soft joke, but Meghan's reaction was sharp, tense, almost panicked. Later that night, when he asked her gently why the question upset her, she snapped that he should know better than to bring that up in public. But he hadn't brought it up. Someone else had. So who was she really angry at? Moments like that weren't isolated. They piled up quietly. A stack of inconsistencies, evasions, reactions that didn't match the situation. And if Trevor had known then what he knew now, that Meghan's past held a medical truth she was terrified of confronting, maybe he could have understood her panic better. Maybe he would have seen the signs. But hindsight is cruel like that. It doesn't show you the truth until it's too late to do anything about it. The divorce didn't come out of nowhere. It grew from whispers. Whispers Meghan heard from casting agents who didn't see her as leading lady.